Okay, well, let's think for a minute about authenticity of ourselves in this environment. In order to offer a ubiquitous persona, legally accessible information assets must be available to the individual and also be secure. Is it realistic that these systems can be connected securely while being independent of any central influence? Especially that this would be worldwide access to the masses? Isn't it even more problematic?
Good point, but maybe the answer to that is to apply the same approach that Bitcoin has. Decentral cryptocurrency requires roughly the same things, and they seem to be doing quite well. So if we're talking about a decentralized identity system to handle assets and identity without a centralized structure, then we're definitely in the realm of how a cryptocurrency handles sensitive and highly valuable information. So maybe we should take a cue from those decentralized systems that handle that valuable information. And I think that's where we'll find a better answer for this.
Okay, and psychologically speaking, has there been any studies about how the virtual world will impact children's development if they were to engage in it in the same amount of time as they do, say, television or video games?
Stanford is currently doing this kind of research, but they haven't published any results yet. Stanford has actually been doing research like this for the last 20 years, probably the first round of VR back in the 90s, so they're really solid on that. That being said, children under 13 probably shouldn't be using VR headsets to begin with, as it will likely cause long-term detriment. When it comes to understanding how VR affects the brain, scientists don't really know what's going on. That's a big thing. Nick Mehta, a neuroscientist at UCLA, has been running studies on animals with virtual reality to see how their brains are handling things. The findings are showing that things are not adding up. When you're walking around in the real world, you're getting input from multiple senses, and they're all in perfect agreement. Mehta, who studies how virtual environments affect the brains of, say, rats, at the level of individual neurons, has added that in virtual reality the brain is expecting everything to be in sync, but things are not in sync. So the virtual world is incomplete to our senses. He and his colleagues built special setups with tiny little treadmills that the animals could run on while exploring a virtual room. And the rats appeared to behave normally in the setup, but when they looked at the animals' brains, they found really surprising stuff. For example, in the hippocampus, the brain region involved in mapping an individual's location in space, as well as other functions including memory, learning, and dreaming, well, 60% of the neurons simply shut down while the animals were in virtual reality. Many of the neurons that don't shut down show abnormal patterns of activity. In the real world, these neurons create a map of space, but in the virtual world, the map of space is totally destroyed. Again, we're going back to my comment earlier about spatial reasoning in a virtual world and how this stuff is really important. Mehta and his team suspects that part of the brain involved in keeping track of the animal's location is so fine-tuned that it expects everything to be in sync. It's the same thing with us. So even he believes that's why these neurons are shutting down in virtual reality. But is it bad for the animals that the hippocampus shuts down in virtual reality? Once again, we don't know the long-term consequences of this stuff. When millions of us are using virtual reality 6 to 7 hours a day, we may want to look into it, given it's such a big change. Now, does that mean we should never use virtual reality or augmented reality? Should we never put a headset on? Well, not at all. I think it means we have a lot to learn to improve the technology and to address these perception issues properly. And also, in the meantime, we should make limited use of these virtual reality headsets and augmented reality headsets for our own good. Prolonged use is probably a bad idea without taking breaks, so keep in mind it's a sometimes thing, not an all the time, as Cookie Monster would say. Cookies are sometimes, not all the time.
Okay, good point, to be balanced and cautious as we proceed. Now, in the metaverse, how would laws be implemented? Would there even be any laws?
Nope, it's going to look like Mad Max. No, seriously, likely it would adhere to international law, not individual country jurisdiction, unless both parties involved were located in the same real-world country when it took place. So in a virtual world, things get really tricky and depend on a lot of factors. When all else fails, I think it would likely start with international law and supersede locality. As we say in the virtual world, where sex is pretty big, what's legal in the Netherlands is probably not legal in the United States. But in a virtual world, how does one define the law when an American has cyber sex with a 15-year-old in Amsterdam? I have no idea how that's going to work itself out in legality, but I suspect it'll likely be a situation where virtual worlds, especially if they're decentralized, will be subject to international law. I think that's how we'll deal with it. If both parties are located in the United States when such a locality law is broken, then international law doesn't need to intercede. If there's a dispute between location, then instead of taking one side or the other for country, we just say international law. And I think that's what's going to happen is we're going to start finding happy mediums where we say, well, you may have, age of consent is 18 over here and 15 over here or whatever. International law is probably going to look at virtual worlds in the long run as a happy medium and say, both of you are wrong, it's down the middle.
Okay. And now, if rules were broken, not rules pertaining to interoperability, but rather to illegal activity, what consequences would ensure? I mean, would consequences bleed over into the physical world?
More than likely, yeah. If you break a law today in a digital manner, there's consequences in the real world. But are you breaking a real world law in the digital world or just a digital law? Again, things get weird in null space like that. So if you are in the real world and you hack the government, you hack into NASA or the FBI, you're breaking a law in digital space. There's definitely a real world consequence for that. So it depends. Are you breaking a virtual world's law? Then in which case you got virtual consequences. Did I go around and break, is there a law that says you can't drive in Second Life without a virtual license? A lot of roleplay sims actually have that. You got to go get a virtual license before they'll let you drive around the roads. What are the consequences? Just virtual. They just, eject you and ban you or something. Am I going to break a real world law in here? Again, we're back to international law, and that gets tricky. International law versus, context is going to be key. Does it bleed over to real life? Probably. It depends on where you are and what's going on. And I think that's where it's going to get really interesting is you can't just say it's black or white. We have to really start delving into the details of what happened and why. The context is going to be king going forward.
It's interesting, and here's a simple but yet maybe not so simple to answer question. Why do we need a metaverse?
We don't, but it would be cool to have, wouldn't it? Just like any technology or advancement, it expands our ability to work, to play, and to interact. Do we need the internet? No, but you much prefer saying, okay, Google, and asking a question than walking down to the library and using the card catalog to find the book to look it up. Now, wouldn't you? So do we need it? No, but it would be cool to have, just like the internet was, before it.